Hey guys, Oscar Combs here with the ISO 9001 group. And in today's episode of the ISO show, we're going to talk about, are you prepared in the event of an emergency? Now, this could be an emergency in your organization, or it could just be an emergency in your own family or your own household. We need to ensure that we are prepared for emergencies so that we can respond properly. Many people prepare for an emergency right before the emergency, or they try to prepare for the emergency during the emergency. And God forbid, some people even try to prepare after the emergency. In most cases, it's too late to do it at that time. And so we need to prepare for emergencies before the emergencies. So are you prepared for an emergency? Let's talk about it. So guys, as I speak to you right now, I'm in the middle of an emergency. Hurricane Beryl came rumbling through Texas, and specifically here in Houston on July the 8th around 4 a.m. I remember hearing the rumblings around 4 a.m. And so I kind of got up, and around 6, my normal process, get up around 5:30, and I was preparing to kind of get started for my day around 6, and then lights went out. Now, Hurricane Beryl really, from what I saw, didn't cause any major issues. I kind of thought, okay, yeah, we would get some wind, some rain, but it ended being an emergency situation with Beryl, with the high winds, knocking out power for over 3 million homes and businesses in the city of Houston, including the ISO 9001 group, which is why I'm here today talking to you in a hotel room, because the power was out in our office, the power was out at our home. And so part of our emergency response plan is to get a hotel, and so we can still have power and AC, Wi-Fi, all those things, guys. And it's been 5 days in the city without power for over 3 million people. I think there's still like 1 million people still without power as of today. Now, CenterPoint is the organization here in Texas that is responsible for maintaining all of the power lines and things of this nature. And they forecast even 6 to 7 more days next week. So that's definitely what we consider an emergency. Now, no power. Sometimes we take some of these things for granted, like no power, no Wi-Fi. But what does that mean? So that means no AC. It's very hot here in Houston. That's what the H stands for. It's hot. Also, sometimes H stands for hurricanes. And so I've lived here for 50 years, so I'm very familiar with that. And so that's 99 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the heat of the day, right? Making it almost unbearable in many cases for many people to stay in their homes. Even if you try to put the windows up, it's just hot heat. Your refrigerator's out. All your food, basically you have to throw it away. That could be hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars that people are losing, in food and things of this nature. This means hospitals where sick people are, or elderly people are, and, people have lost their lives because, the power is out at these facilities. This means traffic lights are out in the city. People are, we already drive crazy, and here we don't have traffic lights, so that don't make it any better. And no internet, right? I mean, now that's something that we definitely take for granted. There's almost nothing we can do without internet nowadays, right? So it also means like the hotels. A lot of people were trying to book hotels like myself, and those rooms ran out very early, which is why it's important to have that emergency response plan before the emergency. Loss of money for people. People can't go to work. People are having to spend money, as I mentioned, on hotels, extra food, and just the day-to-day living. They were not anticipating to spend that money. And what about just the mental stress of it all, right? And so this definitely is an emergency. Now, it's not big as some of the other emergencies that we've experienced right here in Houston, and you guys have experienced your own emergencies, but I'm here just trying to share a personal story and tie it back into us being prepared for emergency responses, guys. But this is definitely not one of the biggest emergencies that we've had in Houston, but it's definitely dragging out much longer in some cases due to lack of preparedness. I would like to say that I do extend my prayers and my condolences to anyone that's been impacted. Of course, I'm impacted, my family is impacted, my loved ones also impacted. But any of you that are out there, you know, this seems like a dark time, it's tough, but that's okay. Let's pray about it. Let's keep our heads up. Let's keep hope alive. And, you know, even in a dark situation, there's learnings, there's opportunities, you know, and at the end of it, just know that the sun will come out again and we'll all get through this. So we do have to keep that in mind, guys. Now, let's talk about the importance of emergency response preparedness. Let me repeat that. Importance of emergency response preparedness. What does that sound like? It sounds like exactly what it says. We need to be prepared to respond in the event of an emergency. So what is an emergency? So I looked up the word, the term emergency. It's a serious, unexpected, and often dangerous situation requiring, listen to this, immediate attention. Let me say this again. Let me point out some key things. It's an emergency, it's unexpected, and it's dangerous, and it requires an immediate response from those involved in the emergency. You know, our response in many cases during an emergency, guys, can mean life or death. Like, it really comes down to that. Like, if we don't respond the right way, it can put us in more danger in an emergency. Just think about it. And let's say a fire happened. Like, that's an emergency. You know, sometimes people end up putting themselves in more danger during a fire as opposed to trying to evacuate. They're trying to grab things and inhaling a bunch of smoke and things of this nature. So their decision during the emergency is putting them in more risk. So that's why it's important, for one, for us to really understand that we need to be prepared in the event of an emergency. And so to do that, we need to have an emergency preparedness and response plan. What is that? An emergency preparedness and response plan. It is what it sounds like. It's a plan that you put in place prior to having an emergency so that you already have a predetermined way of responding to the emergency. So even if we go back to like ISO 14001, 2015, ISO 45001, 2015, and clause 8.2 addresses emergency preparedness and response. Maybe that's something that we should even put in ISO 9001. What do you guys think about that? I know you said, man, we don't need nothing else in ISO 9001, and that's a quality standard, but your productions can't run if you don't have emergency plans in place. So maybe that's something that we'll propose, since we're part of the TAG 176 committee, that we'll propose that they put into ISO 9001. Now, don't get too upset with me, but you guys just think about it. I think it's a good idea. Now, it also says that organizations shall establish, implement, and maintain processes needed to prepare for and respond to an emergency or potential emergency situation. So what are potential emergency situations? Well, there's a lot of things that could go wrong, right? But there are things that have gone wrong and that you are familiar with, right? So the first thing involves you doing a risk assessment in your operations. And I know ISO is talking about organizations, but your family is an organization as well. So even on an individual level, you should be thinking about these things, doing a risk assessment. What are the emergencies that could occur? So if you're like, let's say in a plant, for example, well, we know there could be an explosion, there could be fires, there could be gases, there could be a whole lot of different things, right? Let's say that we're in this situation that I'm in. I live in Houston, I live in a coastal city. So I know that there's a potential of a hurricane. There's potential of heavy rains. There's potential sometimes even of tornadoes. These are things that I can sit back and I can analyze, and I can say, okay, it's probable that a hurricane can happen. It's probable that a thunderstorm can occur. It's probable that power may go down, right? It's probable that internet may go down, right? So a lot of these things we can assess through our risk assessment process, and we can identify them as potential risk. Now, the standard says, based upon your risk assessment, then you should put in an emergency response plan and procedures based upon that. Now, once you have the emergency response plan based upon your risk assessments, you should be then identifying in that plan how we will respond. And this is all done before the emergency, not during the emergency, not after the emergency, or not even right before the emergency, guys. These are things that you really need to sit down, analyze, so that we can make sure that we're responding properly during or after the emergency. Not putting a plan in place, we should be responding, or hopefully even doing things to get out of the emergency. Run those drills. That's why the drills are so important, because when you're running a drill, an emergency drill, you can say, okay, this response is effective or this response is not effective. We need to maybe adjust our plan, but you don't want to get yourself in the emergency, try to execute your emergency plan, and then you find out that it's not effective. That's way too late. So that's the importance of running those drills, guys. So in the event, let's say total loss of power at the home or office, that's part of my emergency response plan. Is to, if the power is out, especially at both locations, is to book a hotel as soon as possible. Kind of everybody else is kind of, getting overwhelmed, and it is an overwhelming situation. So I don't want to discount that, but that's the part of having a plan. A plan allows you to think more rational during an emergency, where you don't have to try to think about, oh man, what can I do? Now it's a hurricane. All the lights are out. All the power is out. Internet's out. Whoa, freaking out. Well, it's some of that, but because you have a plan, you don't freak out as much, right? You have an emergency plan. You've tested it. It works. So that's why during the hurricane, I lost maybe one day, not a whole week, but I had to book a hotel. I had to get set up, and we still have clients that need to be serviced, right? We still have people that still need to be addressed and answer questions and projects that we're working on and things of that nature, right? So the world doesn't stop just because there's a hurricane, right? And the world doesn't stop when you have your emergency in your local area or in your company, right? Your customers are still impacted. Your employees are still impacted. Your suppliers are still impacted. So it's better to have, in the community, it's better to have something in place so that you know how to respond during an emergency. So, is an expected dangerous situation an emergency? Remember, the definition of an emergency said that it was an unexpected situation. Well, what about an expected situation? Is it also an emergency? Sure it is, but we should have things in place to respond to it, because it's not surprising in Houston that we have hurricanes. We have hurricanes quite often. We just had one, Hurricane Harvey, that was very catastrophic. Did a lot of damage, guys. So due to satellites, we have these reconnaissance flights. Guys, we typically know before a hurricane hits, we have 2, sometimes 3 weeks lead time to prepare, to really think about the implications of this. And they're telling us every night on the news, it's getting closer, it's turning this way. The forecast is that the path of the hurricane will be this, and it's going to impact this location first. And sometimes we can see that, I think Hurricane Beryl hit Jamaica first, and then it came our way. And so we saw that because of what it did in Jamaica, that it packed a punch, right? And so, but we knew that it was going to lessen its impact or its strength when it came our way. That was the forecast. And so it hit us as a level 1 or a tropical storm in some cases. But the point is, guys, we had a lot of time to prepare. We had a lot of notice, and we've done this before. We went through Hurricane Alicia back in 1983, big hurricane. Hurricane Ike back in 2008, very big. Harvey, 2017. So this is not unexpected for us. It's totally expected. Like when you live in California, sometimes you can expect an earthquake, right? If you live in certain areas, you can expect tornadoes. If you live on the East Coast, let's say in New York, for example, you can expect snowstorms, right? These things are emergencies, but they're not unexpected emergencies. But it seems like every time we have a hurricane, we're unprepared. People, it's like we don't know what to do. The local, the federal, the state, and the local officials are not prepared. We end up having the same problems. We shouldn't do that because it's not anything new. We should already have our emergency response plans, and based upon the forecast, we should have already ran drills and things of this nature, so that immediately after, or even during an emergency, during a hurricane, we can respond appropriately. So let's talk about some of the poor emergency preparedness and responses by Texas and some of our local officials. So as I mentioned, Texas, we had several weeks to prepare for Hurricane Beryl. It was not surprising. I prepared for it. So I'm assuming that our government officials, they were on the news talking about it and talking about giving us tips and things of this nature, saying that they had put resources in place, but surely not. Surely not. 5 days. We still without, 1 million people still without power. They're still trying to organize themselves, specifically CenterPoint, also the city of Houston. Guys, I've lived in Houston for 50 years and none of this is new to me. So I know it shouldn't be new to those in charge, but we still have people drowning, driving their cars into low areas that we all know drown every year, submerged with flooding. And every year the city talks about putting up barriers to prevent that. They talk about it, but they don't do anything about it actually, right? That's what I'm talking about. When it comes to emergency preparedness, the plan is great, but we need to test the plan. And more importantly, we need to put things in place that's in the plan, right? A lot of people have plans, oh, we're going to do this, do that, do this, but they don't actually take the plan and convert it to actionable items and execute those items. And evidently, this is what's going on in the city of Houston, in the state of Texas. You guys saw the news as well when we had the big freeze and our power grid went out. Come on now, guys. We should be able to address our power issues, our flooding issues efficiently. Like I said, I've been here 50 years. Many people have been here much longer, but we still have these slow response times, guys. The power went out on July the 8th. It is July the 12th, and they predict that the power will be out all the way up until the 16th, 17th, possibly the 18th. That's unacceptable, right? I mean, just imagine. People, all the things that I mentioned that people are going through, they have to go through this for about another week in some cases. Let's talk about CenterPoint. Some people are calling them CenterPointless. I'm not going to do that. I appreciate everything that everybody is doing, including CenterPoint and all the other power linemen and things of this nature coming from different states, surrounding cities, coming in to help Houston. We appreciate all of that. These guys are working around the clock. And so don't get me wrong, but it's not their issue. The issue is typically, like it is in every organization, is typically the management or the process that is failing. That's why I always encourage our clients, don't focus on the employees. Focus on your procedure, your processes, your management, your leadership. Make sure all that things are right at that level, because the line people in your company doing the work, these linemen here trying to repair all of this damage, they're just operating within the process. They didn't establish the process. So the issue is with those establishing the process. As of even today, 7/12, but more specifically yesterday, CenterPoint was still in the process of negotiating payments with all these linemen that came into the city to help. They didn't have work orders. I mean, I saw that. And I also saw it on various linemen were posting on social media saying that they're sitting in parking lots, their trucks. I saw their trucks sitting idle. Whole parking lots of linemen ready to work, but they couldn't work because CenterPoint was negotiating rates. They were trying to establish work orders, things of this nature. So of course the people can't go to work to do the repairs if there's no agreement on the pay and if there's no process in place for work orders. Guys, this is something that CenterPoint should have done 4 to 5 days prior to July the 8th, not on July the 11th or July the 10th, or not even on July the 8th. They should have been putting teams together, reaching out to people, putting the response plan together, because guys, it is not unforeseeable that a hurricane will knock out the power. It happens all the time. That's nothing new. So CenterPoint should have been coordinating all of these things, I would say, back on July the 1st, because we all knew that this hurricane was coming. As I mentioned, they had been reporting it for like 2 weeks. So there's literally no reason for CenterPoint not to reach out to the states, other cities, to coordinate, put teams together, negotiate rates, already have that negotiated. How are we going to dispatch work orders and even assign these teams to different locations in the city so that work could start on July the 9th, not work start on July the 10th or 11th or 12th. You see, this is the problem with most organizations, that we're waiting until after the emergency, or sometimes, as I mentioned, right before the emergency, during the emergency, or after the emergency, to put our emergency plan together. And look at this. That's just the planning part. That's not even the response part. We're waiting right before the emergency, during the emergency, or right after the emergency to even do the planning part. So, of course, you're not going to be able to respond if you hadn't planned properly. So this is exactly what seems to have happened here in Houston, Texas. Once again, even though hurricanes are nothing new for us, power is going out, nothing new for us. And at some point, these officials need to be held accountable and held responsible, and making sure that we are planning and then responding per the plan. Guys, let me know what you think about your company's emergency preparedness and response plans. Do you guys run drills? Do you have an emergency preparedness and response plan? What about just even in your own home? It's important for the company, but your family is also impacted when there is an emergency. So guys, I encourage you to follow and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification button so every time we drop a new video, you'll get that notification. Why don't you take a moment and write a comment? Tell me about if you have been impacted by Beryl. Write a comment. Let us know how you were impacted. What are you seeing in regards to emergency response and preparedness? How did you respond? Were you prepared? Or do you share some of the same sentiments that I have as well in regards to the state officials, local Houston officials, and CenterPoint? So guys, emergency preparedness will save you time, money, lives, stress. Guys, that's all it takes. Just take time to think about and assess your risk and your potential emergencies. Put plans in place so that we don't have to increase the negative impact. Hope that you found this video helpful. Oscar Combs with the ISO 9001 group, helping organizations and people improve their operations and reduce their risk. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye now.